If you saw me right now, wearing a crisp button-down shirt, standing in the middle of a big city surrounded by towering glass skyscrapers, you'd probably think I was just another ordinary college student. But the truth is, I had to fight for every single step to stand here. I was born in a small town in Kansas, a place with more cornfields than people, more wind than opportunities. My family was poor. Dad worked at a meat processing plant, and Mom had a part-time job at a tiny grocery store. Money in our house was always fragile, like a thin glass that could shatter at any moment. There was only one thing I was taught over and over: you have to study hard. That's the only way out of here. So I studied. I studied like my entire life depended on every test, every single point. And in the end, a miracle happened. I received a full scholarship to a big university in Seattle. The day I got the acceptance email, my mom cried. Dad didn't say anything. He just patted my shoulder. It was the first time I'd ever seen him look proud. But a scholarship didn't mean everything would be easy. Tuition was covered, but city life wasn't. Rent, food, books, transportation. Every single one of those numbers forced me to count every dollar. So from my freshman year, I started working part-time. During the day, I went to class. In the afternoon, I handed out flyers on the street. At night, I delivered food on an old bicycle I'd bought from a senior. On weekends, I waited tables at an upscale cafe that hosted events. There were days I slept less than 4 hours. But I never gave up, because I knew if I stopped, everything would end. That night was just another normal shift. The cafe where I worked was catering a high society party. Expensive cars lined the entire street. Guests wore suits and evening gowns, talking about things I didn't even understand. And there I was, running back and forth with trays of wine. "Sterling, hurry up," the manager shouted. "Coming." I smiled at the guests, poured wine, cleared tables, wiped floors. 3 hours passed like a whirlwind. When the party finally ended, my feet were almost numb. I went into the staff room to collect my pay. But when I asked the manager, he just shrugged. "The clients paid less than expected. We can't pay the staff full tonight." I thought I'd misheard. "What do you mean?" He sighed like this was completely normal. "You can take half, or nothing at all." I stared at him. My heart pounded in my chest. "But I worked the whole shift." "So?" He shrugged. "If you don't like it, quit." One simple sentence. But it felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to argue. I wanted to shout. But in the end, I stayed silent. Because I knew if I caused a scene, I wouldn't even have this job anymore. I left the cafe with empty hands. Outside, it was raining. Not a light drizzle. It was pouring. I stood under the awning for a moment, checking my wallet. $3. Not enough for a cab. The bus had stopped running. I sighed. "Fine. I'll walk." My dorm was almost 4 miles away. I pulled my jacket tight and stepped into the downpour. Within minutes, I was soaked. My shoes squelched on the sidewalk. Streetlights reflected on the wet pavement like endless streaks of light. I walked with my head down, trying to block the cold wind, until it happened. As I crossed an intersection, I didn't see anyone in front of me. And then, thud, I slammed straight into someone. "Sorry," I said immediately. I looked up, and that's when I saw him. A guy a little taller than me, standing under a large black umbrella. The streetlight illuminated his face. Dark brown hair slightly damp at the edges. Deep blue eyes. He was wearing an expensive suit, the kind I'd only seen in magazines. Clearly, he had just left the fancy party. And there I was, standing in front of him, drenched like a drowned rat. For a few seconds, we just looked at each other. I felt embarrassed. "Sorry," I repeated. "It's fine." His voice was low and calm. He looked me up and down. He probably realized I was one of the waitstaff from the party. I started to walk away, but as I turned, he called me back. "Wait." I turned around. Before I could process what was happening, he held out his umbrella toward me. I froze. "What?" "Take it." I shook my head immediately.
"No, imukai."
He glanced at the pouring rain, then back at me. My shirt was plastered to my body. I must have looked pathetic. He said softly, "You need it more than I do." I opened my mouth to protest, but he had already placed the umbrella in my hand. "Wait!" I didn't even finish the sentence. He had already turned away and stepped into the rain, without an umbrella, without hesitation. A few seconds later, his figure disappeared into the dark street. I stood frozen under the streetlight. In my hand was a stranger's black umbrella, and for some reason, my heart was beating faster than usual. I didn't even know his name, but that night, in the cold Seattle rain, my life changed. That night, I walked the entire way back to the dorm holding the stranger's umbrella. The rain never let up, but under that wide black umbrella, I barely got any wetter. The strange thing was, I kept thinking about him, not in a romantic way or anything. Just, I didn't understand. Who gives their only umbrella to a complete stranger and then walks in the rain like that? A rich guy from a fancy party. Poor waiter like me. Two completely different worlds. Yet he only said one simple sentence. "You need it more than I do." When I got back to my dorm room, it was almost midnight. My room was tiny. A single bed, an old study desk, a cramped wardrobe, but it was everything I could afford. I hung the umbrella on the hook by the door. Rainwater dripped onto the floor. I stood there looking at it for a while. "Tomorrow I'll return it," I muttered to myself. But I immediately realized the problem. I didn't know who he was. I hadn't even asked his name. I sighed and shook my head. Whatever. I'll probably never see him again. Seattle is a big city. Chance encounters like that usually happen only once. I quickly pushed the thought aside, because the next morning I still had to wake up at 6 to make deliveries before class. 1 week later, the new semester had officially started. I was standing in front of the large lecture hall for the economics department. Students were everywhere. I checked my schedule on my phone. Eco 201, room 3A. I walked up the stairs. My mind was still on the mountain of reading the professor had assigned before the first class. When I entered the room, almost every seat was taken. It was a big class, over 100 students. I quickly found an empty seat near the middle. But the moment I sat down, I noticed a familiar back in the row ahead. Dark brown hair, tall frame, crisp white shirt. My heart suddenly stopped. No way. The person turned around at that exact moment. And when our eyes met, I recognized him instantly. It was him, the guy who had given me the umbrella in the rain. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. He seemed to recognize me too. His blue eyes widened slightly. Then a small smile appeared. I felt my heart race. "Hey," he said softly. I was a little flustered. Hey." He turned fully in his seat. "You're the guy from the rain." I let out a small laugh. "Yeah. And you're the one who gave me the umbrella." We looked at each other for a few more seconds. Then he extended his hand.
I'm Kellen.
I shook it.
I'm Sterling.
His hand was warm, nothing like the cold rain that night. "So we're in the same class," Kellen said. "Looks like it." I scratched my head, a bit embarrassed. The umbrella." Before I could finish, he shrugged.
No ruse.
"I should still return it. You can keep it a little longer." I frowned. "Why?" Kellen smiled lightly. "Seattle rains a lot. I don't know why, but that made me laugh." The professor walked in right then. Our conversation stopped. But throughout the entire lecture, I couldn't focus completely, because I could always feel Kellen's presence right in front of me. Every now and then he turned back to ask me something about the lecture. He talked so naturally. There was no rich guy or poor guy distance. But I still felt the difference between us clearly. Kellen always dressed neatly. His laptop was the latest model. The watch on his wrist was probably worth several months of my rent. And me, I used an old laptop I'd bought secondhand online. My backpack was frayed at the corners. My jacket was 3 years old. That gap made me unconsciously keep my distance. But Kellen didn't. After class, as students started leaving, he turned back to me. "Do you have another class?" "I do. But in an hour. Want to grab coffee?" The question caught me off guard. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't have money for the cafes near campus. Kellen seemed to notice my pause. He smiled. My treat. I shook my head immediately. You don't have to. It's just coffee.
No.
I took a breath and told the truth. I'm trying to save money. In that moment I thought he'd feel awkward. Or worse, pity me. But Kellen just nodded. Got it. Then he stood up. I have class too. I breathed a sigh of relief. But as I was about to leave, he suddenly added. Sterling. Yeah. I still haven't thanked you. I was surprised. Thanked me for what? For not refusing the umbrella. I laughed. That sounds weird. Kellen shrugged. Maybe. He looked at me for a few seconds. Then he said something I would remember for a long time. Anyway, I'm really glad we met again. I don't know why, but when I heard that, I felt something warm spread through my chest. Maybe that meeting in the rain wasn't just a coincidence. And I had no idea yet that it was only the beginning. After that class, I thought things between me and Kellen would stay at the level of normal classmates. We might talk a few sentences in class. Maybe exchange notes once in a while. Then after the semester, each of us would go our own way. But I was wrong. 2 days later, we ran into each other in economics class again. This time, when I walked into the lecture hall, Kellen was already sitting in the middle row, and there was an empty seat right next to him. When he saw me, he waved. Sterling, over here. I hesitated a little, but I still walked over. Is this seat free? I asked. Yeah. I sat down. You're early. Kellen shrugged. I prefer sitting in the middle rather than the front. Why? If you sit in front, the professor calls on you more. I laughed. You don't look like the type who's scared of being called on. Not scared, he said. Just lazy. That answer surprised me, because in my head, people like Kellen were usually perfect. Top students, perfect grades, rich families. But he talked so casually. No arrogance at all. Class started. While the professor lectured, Kellen occasionally leaned over to ask me small questions. Do you understand this part? Yeah. Are you good at this subject? I just read ahead. He looked at me like he'd discovered something. You really study hard. I smiled faintly. I don't have a choice. Kellen didn't say anything else, but I noticed his gaze lingered on me longer than usual. After that class, we started talking more. At first, it was just about homework, then about the professors. Then gradually, we talked about life. One afternoon, as we were walking out of the lecture building, Kellen asked, Where do you live? South Dorm. Far. About 20 minutes walk. He nodded. What about you? I asked. Apartment. Near campus. Yeah. He said it simply, but I guessed it wasn't an ordinary apartment. Just from the way he dressed, I knew his life was very different from mine. But Kellen never mentioned money, and I never asked. One night, after studying late in the library, we walked out of campus together. It started raining again. Not as heavy as before, but enough to get us wet. Kellen looked up at the sky. Seattle really never stays dry. I laughed. Then I suddenly remembered something. I opened my backpack. Oh, and now that I think about it, I took out the black umbrella. His umbrella. I held it out to Kellen. I think it's time to return this. He looked at the umbrella for a moment. Then at me. I thought you liked it. I do like it. Then why return it? Because it's yours. Kellen smiled lightly. Sterling. Yeah. What if I said I don't need it? I'd still return it. He sighed. You're stubborn. So are you. For a few seconds, we just stood there under the light rain. Then Kellen suddenly said, Fine. He took the umbrella, but instead of closing it and putting it away, he opened it. The wide umbrella instantly covered both of us. I was surprised. What are you doing? Kellen shrugged. It's raining, but I'm heading back to the dorm. Then I'll walk with you part of the way. You don't have to. Sterling. He looked at me, his eyes calm but determined. It's just a walk. I don't know why, but I didn't refuse anymore. We started walking under the umbrella. The distance between us was quite close. Our shoulders occasionally brushed when we passed narrow sections of sidewalk. My heart beat strangely fast. After a while, Kellen spoke. Sterling. Yeah. You have part-time jobs, right? I was a little surprised. How did you know? I've seen you leave campus really late many times. I nodded. Yeah, a few jobs. Like what? Handing out flyers, delivering food, and waiting tables at the cafe. You do that many? I need the money. Kellen was silent for a few seconds. I can help. I stopped walking immediately.
No.
My answer came out almost reflexively. Kellen stopped too. I haven't finished talking. I know what you're going to say. Sterling. I don't need your money. My voice was a little firm. Not because I was angry, but because I was scared. Scared that if money entered the picture, things between us would become weird. Kellen looked at me for a few seconds. Then he nodded gently. Okay.
No argument.
No trying to convince me. Just simple acceptance. We kept walking. But somehow, after that conversation, I felt something had changed. Not in a bad way, but closer. When we reached the front of the dorm, I stopped. This is far enough. Kellen looked at the old building behind me, then back at me. Sterling. Yeah. You're really different. Different how? He thought for a moment, then said, You're not like anyone I've ever met. I smiled. You mean I'm weird?
No.
He shook his head. His eyes softened. I mean, I want to understand you more. That sentence made my heart skip a beat. And for the first time, I started asking myself a question I had never thought about before. If the gap between two different worlds could really be erased, what would happen between me and Kellen? After that night, the relationship between me and Kellen changed in a very natural way. There wasn't one specific moment that marked the change. It was just, we started appearing in each other's lives more and more. At first, it was shared classes. Kellen usually sat next to me in economics. And since I always read ahead, sometimes he would lean over and whisper, Sterling, what did the professor just say? I quietly slid my notebook toward him. Here. He looked at my notes and smiled. Your handwriting is nice. I write slowly, that's why. Maybe I should sit next to you from now on and copy your notes? Up to you. Sounds like you're reluctant. I just don't want to become a free tutor. He chuckled softly. Conversations like that happened all the time. But what surprised me the most was, Kellen actually started studying seriously. One afternoon in the library, he sat across from me with a rare focused expression. Sterling. Yeah. Do you think I can get an A in this class? I looked at the calculations on his laptop. Possible. Really? But you have to read 2 more chapters. He sighed. I'm starting to question our friendship. Friendship? I raised an eyebrow. Kellen smiled lightly. Yeah, we're friends. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because the word sounded strange in my chest. Friends. I wasn't sure I only saw him as a friend. The following weeks passed quickly. We studied together in the library, sometimes ate lunch together in the cafeteria. Occasionally Kellen even walked me back to the dorm. But there was one thing he had never seen. My part-time jobs. I deliberately never let him know, because I didn't want Kellen to see the other side of my life. The tired side, the exhausted side, the poor side. But every secret eventually gets discovered. It was a Friday night. I was delivering food to a customer in the downtown area. My old bicycle rattled every time I pedaled hard. It was quite cold. I pulled my jacket tight and stopped in front of a luxurious apartment building. I checked the address on my phone. Correct. I locked the bike and went into the lobby. The security guard looked at me suspiciously but finally let me go up. When I stood in front of the apartment door, I rang the bell. A few seconds later, the door opened, and I almost froze. The person standing in front of me was Kellen. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. Sterling. I was still wearing my delivery jacket, holding the food bag. Kellen looked at me, then at the bicycle visible through the glass behind me. then back at me. You deliver food? I scratched my head. Yeah. A short silence fell. I felt a little embarrassed. Not because of the job, but because I didn't want Kellen to see me like this. But his reaction was completely different from what I had imagined. Kellen opened the door wider. Come in. No need. It's cold. I have another order. He didn't say anything. He just took out his wallet. How much? It was already paid online. Tip. No need. Sterling. He looked straight into my eyes. I know you won't accept if I give it directly. I sighed. Then why are you still trying? Kellen shrugged. Because I want to. I hesitated for a moment. In the end, I still took a few dollars from him. Not much, but enough so he wouldn't feel awkward. As I turned to leave, Kellen called me back. Sterling. Yeah. What time do you finish work? Around midnight. He checked his watch. It's only 9 now. Yeah. You haven't had dinner, right? I didn't answer. My silence was the answer. Kellen sighed. Wait here. He went back inside. A few minutes later, he returned with a food box. He handed it to me. I ordered extra. I looked at the box, then at him. You don't have to do this. I know. I'll pay you back. I know that too. I laughed softly. You're really annoying. But you still accept. Couldn't argue. I took the food box. Thanks. Kellen leaned against the doorframe. Sterling. Yeah. Why have you never told me about these jobs? I was silent for a moment. Then I told the truth. Because I didn't want you to see. Why? I didn't want you to think I'm pitiful. Kellen looked at me for a long time. Then he said something I will never forget. Sterling. Yeah. I've never seen you as pitiful. He paused for a moment, then continued very softly. I see you as admirable. My heart pounded. Very clearly. In that moment, I realized something dangerous. I was starting to like Kellen. Not in a friend way, not in a normal way, but in a way that made my heart race every time he looked at me, and that could destroy everything.